we have Ritika Kalia from Runway, Sheridan from Wonder Dynamics, and John Spitzer from NVIDIA. Please welcome them, as well as our moderator, Devin Caldaway, to the stage. Please, let's give them a hand.
Well, back again. Thank you very much for joining me. In lieu of asking you all to laboriously explain what it is your companies do, although I'm sure many of these people will have heard of them, I asked you to supply some video, and I got some, John. You didn't send any over, but I got it. So we're just going to run really quick a video, I think, here that'll show off. There should be no sound, but we might see it down here. Right, here is Wonder Dynamics with some drop-in motion capture and production stuff. We'll see that going. We decided with no sound, but I love that. And here's Runway. This was what you sent over. I love the snail. All generated imagery. And then here's an example of some generative speech being done in an engine, in-game, by NVIDIA's, what is the name of this tool?
This is called Kairos. It's a demo for AI-powered NPCs.
Yeah. So I just much quicker to show you than have us all discuss that. But thank you very much for joining us. And also, as a preliminary, I thought that considering this topic, we should probably acknowledge the writers' strike and the SAG strike and everything else that's going on in Hollywood, since a lot of this bears directly on that. And to that end, I thought, Ty, maybe you could kind of talk us into this, since you sort of sit on both sides of this issue.
Sure.
Maybe just sort of, what's going on here?
Yeah, so I'm an actor by day and entrepreneur by night. Yeah, so at Wonder Dynamics, you just saw a demo. We essentially, you can almost think about us as an AI solve for motion capture, but not only motion capture, but lighting and compositing, and basically a large process that takes a lot of artists and a lot of time, and it costs a lot of money. So for us, really, the focus of what we're trying to do at Wonder Dynamics is speed that process up, and not only to speed it up and help production save money, but also give people more access to these effects. But yeah, I've worked on, as an actor, small films and big films, and I think, I've in 2016 I worked on this movie called Ready Player One. We spent 6 weeks in motion capture, and the technology there is really, really cumbersome. So I think a lot of those films don't necessarily get made. And there's a handful of people within the industry that can get the budgets to go and make those films. And so I think for me, the big excitement around AI is democratization, an expansion of the market, and enabling storytellers to have their voices heard, maybe for the first time. And without those tools, maybe they wouldn't be. And I think, it's Hollywood, I think, is notoriously kind of standoffish to new technology, which is funny, because we wouldn't have cinema without the advent of a camera. So I think technology has really been the single element pushing cinema forward and allowing us to do newer and newer things and tell new kinds of stories. And I think that's really no different. Of course, with AI, we have to think about using it in the most responsible way. And I think that using it to empower artists, to keep them a part of the process, is a deep kind of philosophical focus for us at the company. And I think that's kind of the tune I hear other people singing in the industry. So I think as long as we're doing that, it can be a really, really exciting time. I think that people tend to simplify it a little bit, and to the maybe tune that AI means taking people's jobs, but I don't think I think it's more complex than that, and I think you have to consider how it's being used in each instance.
Yeah, I think that you're right that the dialogue is oversimplified, and I feel that there is this sense, there's still this sort of vibe that AI is sort of creeping in at the edges, or that it's invading in some ways. So I wanted to ask John, for instance, you've been working with this technology and with AI adjacent stuff and all kinds of stuff at NVIDIA. for quite a while. Like, you've seen this kind of thing come and go. Can you maybe speak to, is this new or has it been around?
Yeah, I actually started working on AI in 1984.
There you go.
So it was, I was doing a digital twin of it was actually a chemical plant not far from where I lived in Houston. So I'm from Texas City, Texas, which sounds really cool unless you actually know what Texas City is, because it's a refinery town. So it's not really someplace that you're proud of being from. But yeah, so I created a digital twin as a science fair project for my senior year. And it was driven by an AI, which was expert system based then, not neural net. If I had known now what I knew then, I mean, vice versa, I would use neural nets. But I've been working on AI for decades now, and I've been working on 3D for the last 30 years. So I think it's super exciting what's available in terms of applying AI to both runtime graphics as well as to accelerating game development, just like Ty was referring to, democratizing the technology, because right now it's a very steep learning curve for many of these tools for creating content for games or for films. And to be able to open that up to independent developers who don't have $100 million budgets to go and throw at a project. I mean, I looked at the top games that were released in this past year, and 95% of them were sequels. Now, there's nothing wrong with sequels, right? I mean, we all love, a certain IP. We want to see more and more of that IP. And the one that wasn't a sequel was Harry Potter. So obviously a very well-known IP with many books behind it. So I would love to be able to give independent game developers the same tools and the same ability to create incredibly immersive and compelling content. And I think AI is going to bring that to fruition.
And Ritika, you were coming from Runway is sort of coming out of nowhere, like really blasting out with this generative video, which is so fresh and new that I don't know where to even start talking about it. But you have actually experienced not just building it, but seeing how people are using it. Yeah. Does this tally with sort of your feeling of how people are using it? It's democratizing, it's enabling. Is it doing something new, or is it, I don't know, what is your experience?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a big part of what makes it really exciting, because we build these tools, and once they're in the hands of artists and creators, we see so many ingenious, creative ways that they're using it, incorporating it to really also tell new stories, to get more diverse voices to be able to tell the stories, because you don't need the most expensive computer or approvals from the right people to get started. Like with Runway's Gen 2, we have text to video, image to video. That barrier to create is so much lower that you can go from an idea, get something out there, get feedback, start building. And we're at the point where we've had short films by Paul Trillo, thank you for not answering, that was generated just with Gen 2, all the frames. And this was a very moving film to me personally as well. It explores themes of loneliness, but it also got rave reviews from The New Yorker. We've also seen it being used in music videos that combines footage, real footage with style transfers using Gen 1. Personally for me, my mom's a teacher. When I showed her Gen 2, she said, I would love to have my students explore this as we're reading a book together and we read a scene and people have different interpretations of what happened. They can not only express themselves, but also have a discussion about different versions of what happened. And so I think the diversity in the use case almost in any workflow is part of what makes it exciting and really empowering the creators and making it more accessible to tell your story.
I feel I agree in a way, but also in another way, it seems almost equally obvious that automating motion tracking, generating conversations, generating imagery wholesale. What are these replacing if not animators, writers, photographers, painters? I know that they can be additive, but are they also replacing people? Are they also obsoleting people?
Yeah, for us, our goal is really to make tools for artists. And there's some examples, I think sometimes you can look at a task like rotoscoping that can be very tedious, take creators hours. And one example is in the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once, the rock scene, used Runway to kind of remove some of the shadows, With rotoscoping, you can actually remove that tedious process, and something that would take hours can take minutes, and that's giving creators time to try out more ideas. So I think there's also that angle of like being able to have that time, and the cost to experiment is lower. Now, overall with AI, I think a lot of our jobs will change, but there's also a difference between a job and a task. So some of the tasks that are in our jobs may be automated or will evolve, but the job of a creator that's so central to telling stories, I think that's going to remain. Parts may change, as will all of ours, but
Gotcha, yeah. And Taya, you mentioned earlier like the laborious process. I was going to ask about when you were filming Ready Player One, very heavy on virtual production, on virtual characters, representations, and motion capture. Has that changed, or was that really like sort of laborious enough that you were like, all right, I'm out, I'm going to start a company to completely redo this whole industry?
It wasn't really as laborious for me as it was for some other people in the film. I will say that. But no, I think the exciting part is that you see these fantastical movies, and they're so much fun to watch, and it's an amazing adventure and experience and a spectacle. And then you start thinking about how much they cost, how difficult they are to make, how many people it takes to make them, and you realize, wow, this is super limited, right? There's only very few people that can make these films, or even for actors, you may have less opportunities now than you will have in the future when we have more tools that are enabling us to create these effects. So I think that's super exciting, right? But yeah, it's beyond just the motion capture, the way, and you know this very well, but 3D, so for instance, if you open up Unreal, sometimes I think for a beginner, it can be really intimidating. Don't know what to do in these 3D softwares. They're really complex. They take years to learn. And if you are a master at Unreal, it does not mean you're going to be a master in Maya. So each of these softwares are a career into itself, right? And so I think for someone that's a filmmaker or a storyteller, and they just want to get their story told, they like you said, you don't know where to start. And so I think even to conceptualize stories, using AI tools to conceptualize stories is something that's incredibly exciting as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of the film production, game production, it's tedious work. And I think they're parallel in our runtime with our gaming SDKs as well. We have a product called DLSS, which pretty much speeds up everything while keeping the image quality the same. And it's doing that using AI. But you're able to then free up a lot of the budget on the GPU, the graphics processing unit, to do more interesting work. Because actually only 1 out of 8 of the pixels that's displayed to the gamer is actually rendered. The other are all inferred using AI.
Inferred, yes.
So the interesting work, right, that allows you to have that much more time, almost 7 times as much time to do interesting work, to create more beautiful images, and to have more fluid motion and animation sequences and textures and all of these things which are innately human. The creative part is not going to be replaced by a computer. It's the drudgery, it's the tedium that are going to be taken away so that people can be more creative.
Absolutely.
And I've certainly heard that from other game developers. Ubisoft was an early one who was trying to not fully proceduralize, but increase the power, the output of any given developer, so that you're not sticking 1 tree down, 2 trees down, 3 trees down. You're like, I'd like a forest, and then you say, what kind of forest? A dark forest. Okay, now we're getting started. And you mentioned DLSS. I'm curious actually. Has there been any interest in using DLSS for like AI upscaling, restoration within TV and film? Like, is that an area that you're also getting into? Because it so clearly has these applications within gaming, but does Netflix call you up and say like, hey, we'd love to have our bandwidth usage by using DLSS?
Yeah, I don't think I'm allowed to talk about any of those sorts of deals.
Who says you can't talk about it,
even
John?
if I knew about them. But yeah, so certainly for previewing, I mean, I think one of the big things in film production, I'm not an expert here like Ty is, I mean, but a lot of it is about pre-visualization, right? I mean, so, getting the right shot, and so having that, you need interactive frame rates so that, and they're using tablets with AR to try to go and capture the right film motion or the camera motion and all of those sorts of things. And absolutely, DLSS is immediately applicable to any sort of real-time applications during the production process. Now, of course, in the actual rendering of the final frames for the film, no. I mean, that doesn't make any sense because they're spending, thousands, if not millions of cycles per pixel, and so every pixel needs to be perfect in that case, and DLSS would not be the right tool for that.
Ritika, in the production side of things, it's my experience, my limited experience, that at the pro or enterprise level or many studios and things like that, they don't want to use a tool unless they can be 100% sure of the output and the ownership of the output. Is that something you've run into as you're trying to engage with sort of higher level creators or groups of creators?
Yeah, I think that's a question on a lot of people's minds as they're exploring the space. We've also seen an openness to try out different AI tools. Also, like I mentioned, the rotoscoping examples and what that means. I think there's a spectrum of tools that are available. Like we have 30 different tools. And we kind of think of it as we're building a new kind of camera. And if you look at it from that lens, when camera first came out, there was a lot of questions around what does this mean for privacy or what does this mean for other mediums. And now we can see we both have regulations and social norms around that and the immense benefit that we've all had, entire industries that were created from that. So where we are in that moment now is like that really early stage of this new camera. And we're trying to figure out how do we work with artists, industry partners to best navigate this so that it has the most benefit for everyone, including artists. So that's kind of the lens with which we look at questions like that.
I suppose this is this is as good a place as any to talk about artist rights and ownership. I think maybe Ty, you can tell us it's kind of different for actors. I feel like part of the fear is of giving away your likeness in a virtual production or something like that. You're not 100% sure, like, what did the contract say about reusing my face? That kind of thing. I know that there's a little bit of FUD around that. But, is that a reasonable fear? And like going forward, the worrying about like, essentially, I mean, it sounds crazy, but like having an AI-driven like version of yourself instead of an actor. It's like 5 years ago, I would have said that's the dumbest question asked at this conference. But now I'm like, if I don't ask it now, I'm going to be kicking myself in a year or two.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's the world that we're living in, and I think we, as a community, as an industry, I think we have to be raising this question and having a conversation around it, both, on one side of the strike and the other. I think the whole, you talk about people who work in AI, and I think people who are creatives or artists, we need to come together and be having this conversation. I think there's some really exciting use cases. For instance, if you want to age someone by 50 years, suddenly using that person's likeness becomes very interesting, right? If you're using someone's likeness, obviously against their consent, that's obviously unethical. So I think it's very interesting. Again, it's like going back to the complexity of this. It's a really complex thing, but I think ultimately an artist should be able to consent to how their work is used or their likeness, and I think that we really have to, as an industry, come around artists and make sure that we're supporting them in the most ethical way as possible, and using AI tools really to contribute to their experience, right? Only as much as they support them and contribute to them in all the ways that they want. I think that's where we have to try to land.
And what about for Runway? Like that, I mean, this is an open question for companies that are putting out commercial products or products that are maybe trained on copyrighted material or some artist's material or something. Just today, OpenAI announced DALL-E 3, which in the small print, they're like, oh, it will try to refuse to draw anything in the style of a living artist if it understands that that is the case. It's an interesting step to take, but of course it also acknowledges that DALL-E 3 was almost certainly trained on the work of living artists, which I don't know how you could make an art model that wasn't, but how do you navigate this like, it feels like you're just navigating a minefield. There's no way to win, especially in this question that I'm asking you.
Yeah, I think what's important to me, and to me is also like our founders at Runway are artists themselves, as are many people on the team. So overall, the way we navigate this is with a deep empathy and centering around the artists and the creators. And kind of like what I said, if this is a new kind of camera, this is really early and the space is evolving so fast. So what's important for us is to be really plugged into those conversations that are happening and really learn and listen as this space navigates and continue planning for the future with that in mind.
And what about transparency on the data sets and things? As you're moving, because you're constantly training new models, you're doing new things, you're taking new approaches, is anybody advocating for the artists that are, being included or excluded if they ask, if they don't ask? The sort of contours of consent and consumption here are extremely complicated, as you've said. It's very difficult to navigate, but like, is there a possibility that in the future you may have to have a model that is trained completely on non-copyrighted work or non-living artists or pre-generated art or licensed art? Is there a way to do it ethically?
I think you're starting to get into like different segments of what models can be and what's out there now versus what the space could evolve into. And although I can't share specifics about our roadmap, but like I said, the way we look at it is like we are also a team of artists and we're working very closely with them and with industry partners to navigate this and see what kind of segments come up and if there's ways to different ways to incorporate that into how we build for the future.
Yeah, the approach we're taking at NVIDIA is to partner with people who have large amounts of data, but that have been ethically sourced, legally sourced, with consent from the owners of the IP, so like Getty Images or Shutterstock. And so creating foundational models based upon those data sets. And then, of course, there's an agreement that we have with them so that they're properly compensated for it. But then you could then partner with a large company. Let's say we have a game publisher which has, 30 years of IP over multiple franchises. And so they would then be able to use our infrastructure to create a fine-tuned model of that foundational model. So they have all of their data, which is then added to all of, let's say, Getty's data, and you could have a text-to-image or an image-to-image generator, which was completely ethically sourced. Now, I think the hope here is that there would be a technical solution for this. But I mean, every time I talk to the researchers, that is about getting attribution to the individual images that actually contributed to the resulting image. I'm talking specifically about text-to-image, but it could be text-to-video, could be audio, could be music, right? But then you could say, oh, I want to have this sort of mashup of various IPs, and then it would dole out the appropriate microtransaction for each of those IP owners. Mm-hmm. But I don't think that's possible quite yet. People have taken the approach of either having a deny list on the front end of the prompt, and like you said, denying that to ever actually be sent to the AI service, or on the other side where you're taking the output and then applying a classifier to it, and then trying to figure out what IP went into that image. But that would be easy if it were a known. Like Harry Potter, we know who owns Harry Potter, but let's say it was the Eiffel Tower. Maybe in your data set you had 1,000 different contributors who all had the Eiffel Tower. Do you give a thousandth of a cent to each one? I don't know.
Yeah. So it's clearly an unsolved problem, and it's like that you all have different sort of takes on this. I think it's interesting that Ty, you sort of decided to work outside of the structure that you were already in the filmmaking industry, where you were like, well, this was very difficult. And you mentioned when I was talking with you and Nikola Todorovic, the co-founder, that you wanted to make films, but you couldn't because there wasn't the budget, there wasn't the VFX availability, there wasn't this and that. And I just think it's interesting that instead of going and buttering up a few producers and trying to grease the wheels and make it work, from inside the system you were like, no, I'm going to start a startup and like a deep tech startup, and then spend a couple of years baking that. How did you make that decision? Like, it just seems like an unusual decision.
It was not that black and white.
Tell me about this black and white decision. It's a spur of the moment.
Woke
decision.
Up one day and
yeah.
No, I think we've always been very curious guys. We are super curious about new ways of telling stories, and I think my co-founder and I originally met 10 years ago working on a film, and we were both writing our own projects at the time, and we kind of bonded over that, started sharing material back and forth, and then we started developing our own projects together. And then as we were developing, we were like, oh man, this is going to cost $150 million. Who's going to give us $150 million to pay for this? Surely they're not going to give it to us. And so we knew it was an issue, and we were like, well, what's a feasible way of going forward? How could we make these films that we want to make, tell these stories? And so we started dabbling in technology, and really it took on different iterations over a long period of time. I think we started first dabbling in technology in 2015, 2016, so we kind of pivoted more towards AI in 2018 when we were looking at research papers from the field of robotics and autonomy and all these image perception models, and realized, holy crap, this is going to inevitably be our industry one day. This is going to change how visual effects are done for sure. And because film is just 24 images a second, right? And so we kind of just started building technology selfishly because we wanted to use it to make our films. And then we realized this is much bigger than us. There's a lot of people out there like us that have dreams. They dream of making these movies or telling their stories, and they don't have a way of telling them. Well, what if we turn it into a platform and make it available for everyone, and we can continue to utilize the tools that we build and tell our stories one day? So that was really the evolution of the company. And right now, we always say we're just as much a story company as we are a technology company. We've gone through the first phase of building a foundational technology. We're now entering the second phase where we will start to develop our own stories at the company utilizing the technology.
You mentioned earlier, actually, when we were talking before, that one of your first projects you tried was procedurally generated dialogue, or you were trying to do like virtual characters.
Yeah.
And now, John, like what we just showed was actually sort of an execution of that. So I'm kind of curious, like, why you didn't pursue it, and now, John, have you succeeded? Had the mad scientist like finally?
This is the tip of the iceberg. I mean, we're just starting to explore what this whole thing's capable of doing. I mean, I think the speech recognition, we're good there, right? I think the text-to-speech, there are some very good packages out there for text-to-speech, but when it comes to the large language model, most of the work has been done on chatbots, and you never really want a chatbot to lie to you or try to deceive you or try to put you on the wrong track. Whereas non-player characters in games, this is like sort of like standard fare. You want them to lie to you, and so having that, that ability to imbue certain characteristics into a character, and it has to be a broad range of characteristics, right? So having that while maintaining some control over how the character is going to converse with the player. And, you see all these articles about people like jailbreaking, ChatGPT and doing all sorts of crazy stuff. And if you're a large game publisher, you can't have that happen. You got kids playing the game. It needs to be safe. So I think that's going to be the largest hurdle for us to cross, is to ensure that we're keeping these non-player characters on track, that we're keeping them, on the role that they're supposed to play within the game. Like, reveal this, but don't like try to do trigonometry, right? You don't know hyperbolic functions, but you do know like how to create a knife or an axe. And then by all means, don't be inappropriate at any time. So I think that's going to be a tough thing for us to solve, but we're up for it. I mean, it's definitely going to be a great experience trying to figure this out.
And it's amazing how all of these conversations, some of the most complex problems, come back to ethics,
Yep. That's right.
Fascinating.
Well, I want to actually feel like NVIDIA has already scaled, is my feeling, but I want to talk about scaling with you two. When you have an idea, it goes from a research project to an actual, like a business, something that you're like, well, if I can make 1,000 people do this, how do I make 1 million people be able to access this? Could you talk a little bit about taking an idea and bringing it to, going from the lab to the living room, kind of? Ritika, maybe, I know you work on this like specifically in the back end too.
And we actually have a great recent example. We released motion control recently and a director's mode. So working very closely with the community and the feedback and creators, where with Gen 2 right now, you could do text to video, image to video, so you type a prompt like beautiful waterfall, you get a video back. And some of the feedback has been around we want more control about what's generated, how the different scenes are coming, which way we can put the camera in. So getting that feedback, then we have an amazing world-class research team, getting them to ideate on it. And this is where I think, because we're an applied AI like full stack company, from that moving quickly to getting it in a design, having our front-end team be ready to, so that when people are navigating that, it's in an intuitive way. They're not really worrying about the engineering and the research. They're just thinking, I want to create and I want the camera to go this way, or I want to increase motion. And then, of course, on the back end, making sure that we can serve the incoming requests, scale out properly, run as fast as we can, optimize the way we're serving models. So I think that's an example of where we can go from. We have something that's released, we hear feedback, we can engage with our research team, and once we have that, quickly get it out into the world and get more feedback and go on from there.
Good. And Ty, in 12 seconds or less, can you tell me how you built
Absolutely.
a $1 million company?
I wish somebody could tell me that in 10 seconds or less. So we launched the platform 2.5 months ago live to paying subscribers. We had our closed beta back in March, and so we just launched the cloud platform 2.5 months ago. And it's been a really exciting time. I mean, really fun, and I think we're definitely new to having a product live out in the market. And it's all really exciting, and for both of us, we're first-time founders. So I think it's weird with a startup. I think you can sometimes only see the light at the end of the tunnel, and you just have like insane tunnel vision, and sometimes you forget like where you started. So it's fun to look back at the scale. I definitely did not answer your question about
Not even close.
I think it's crazy you were thinking these things at 16 years of age. I mean, because you said 10 years ago, right? I mean, I was thinking of very different things when I was 16. I mean, we're not going to go there today.
All right,
all
for the
kinds of
next
things.
panel. For the next panel, John.
But yeah, it's
I'm
very
getting a
impressive,
call from your handler. You were talking about it. Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us. It's been fascinating, and I hope we get to talk again soon.
Yeah.
Thanks, Devin.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.